Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 31st of July, the end of the month. Hard to believe we're just blowing through summer so quickly. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can do that easily on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. That'll get you to any of our services for Alaska, whether it's from the Fairbanks Forecast Office, Juneau Forecast Office, the Anchorage Forecast Office, or the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, the Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska, with the latest earthquake information, and of course the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, which some of their forecasts will be shown here tonight. If you can't find what you're looking for, find us at david.snider@noaa.gov. That's my email, and I'm happy to serve you if you have a question about something you can't find or you just don't know how to use information that you're finding on our website. Please let me know, and make sure you check out mobile.weather.gov as well. Might work a lot faster on a slower cell phone connection there. Here's a look at fire danger across the region. We're still watching some elevated, if not extreme, fire danger across the central and upper Yukon valleys, as well as parts of the Tanana Valley and into the upper Tanana Valley region as you get down toward Northway. You can see a little bit more of an increase there. Also, northern parts of southeast, fairly dry. The good news about the weather in southeast, though, as far as fire danger is concerned, not for your enjoyment of summer, is that rain's probably moving back in. So as we check on what's going on in northern southeast in the next couple days, this is probably going to go away. So conditions for very dry weather likely going to be abated there. For the rest of the region, we're also going to start to see changes across central and western sections of Alaska as the next wave of rain moves in. Now, rainfall amounts, according to the center up there in Fairbanks, we're expecting the forecast office folks to start talking about heavier rainfall in the coming days here, and that could be as little as maybe 1/3 of an inch in some cases, to as much as 2.5 inches there on the north slopes of the Alaska Range and on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. Areas in the middle, like Fairbanks and the Tanana Valley, will see considerably less amounts of rain, but you are going to see increasing areas of showers over the next several days through the rest of the week and into the weekend. So plan on changes here for this fire danger map at very least. So wet weather moving in from the west. Let's take a look and see where it is now. Here's the satellite picture from today. The visible satellite picture, careful eye would show a large area of low pressure here right across the central Bering Sea. And the overall flow for most areas is coming in from the west, and this is grabbing onto Pacific moisture and pushing that our way. You can pretty much see a boundary right here. Let's put this in motion one more time. And watch as that leading edge is slowly starting to move north and east. This is going to be a pretty slow change, but a faster change happening out here across the central and eastern Gulf. This has been a long stretch of dry weather for southeast, coming up on about 2 weeks of control under this ridge of high pressure there. A beautiful stretch of weather for folks. Folks in Ketchikan apparently jumping off the boardwalk trying to keep cool there in the creek. So, you know, impressive amounts of heat and dry weather for southeast. Not to be missed, but it does look like it's coming to an end. Now, something else that's interesting on this satellite picture is all these tiny dots that you see here across the Yukon into British Columbia. Got to guess what those are? As a widespread area of thunderstorm activity that has been firing up in the heat of the day. You won't see it probably quite as precisely here in the infrared picture, but you did see those bubble up. There's a lot of convective weather out across the Yukon. We have not seen a whole lot of that across the interior today, but just kind of the trailing edge of that will come up across the international border. What we are seeing on the infrared satellite picture is a lot of low clouds and stratus across the Bering. For a time, at least this afternoon, it looked like most of the Beaufort and Chukchi airport sites along the coast that have had relatively not great flying weather the last couple days improved to at least VFR for a time, so hopefully you're able to make good use of that. And areas out across the west coast will see worsening weather. We've got one pocket of rainfall that was moving in across the the interior of southwestern Alaska, and then another band coming in just ahead of that low pressure system. That's going to expand in coverage as we go through the next couple days. Here's a surface map. We've got colder air up across the north, high pressure sitting here across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, and everything south of that is pretty dry, all the way from Prince William Sound to southeast. Here's the larger component of the ridge here out across the Gulf, and you can see pretty dry weather stretching to the east. To the west, though, is where it starts to break down. A 997 millibar low there across the central Bering, pushing rain into the YK Delta, Bristol Bay down toward Kodiak. Another band of rain a little bit further ahead of that, in through Norton Sound, Unalakleet and Nome already. And out to the west, another surge of warmer, wetter air developing there. As we get into tonight, that first band is going to kind of take over and will be the primary startup, I guess, for the wet weather from the western interior all the way through Kotzebue Sound, through the YK, and just kind of grazing Kodiak Island. Don't be surprised to see showers there. High pressure shifts eastward into the western Yukon, so we'll still have some drier air across the upper parts of the Yukon, the eastern interior, down into Prince William Sound. And southeast, you'll start to see that marine stratus creeping in a little bit more. Probably some showers across the outer coast. Maybe even looking at some fog there across the Dixon entrance. A look out west shows that the next disturbance coming in is going to bring us another round of warmer and wetter air, and as that moves across the Aleutians, we would expect to see more fog, and visibility concerns will be around through the Bering as we go into the midweek. Showers and rain across the YK Delta, rainfall for the Alaska Peninsula. Behind that, rain, drizzle, and fog for the Aleutians, and the warmer air is slowly moving north and east. Into the afternoon, expect widely scattered showers and thunderstorms. Again, a lot of this focus will be across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range. With showers to the south, we'll probably start to see some more activity down into the Chugach of south-central Alaska. The further south you go, the drier you should be, though, and that might include Kodiak and maybe Homer into Prince William Sound. Eastward, we're still kind of in this transitional point from really dry and warm weather across southeast to, well, we're starting to see some more clouds now and a few more showers and therefore some cooler weather. But it won't be a washout initially. That marine stratus layer will start to push in a little bit more, and eventually you'll start to see some of those lower clouds develop. As we get into Thursday, a much better chance for a more widespread cloud cover in southeast, and certainly the higher terrain of southeast will be dealing with rainfall. Probably down below, we'll start to see this fill in a little bit more as we get into your Thursday and Friday. Watching the winds slowly come up as well as we get into Friday and Saturday as this low pressure system moves in. But as we head back to the west on Thursday, notice how widespread the rain is here. This probably won't be a really big exaggeration in this case. This looks like a fairly efficient rainmaker for a large part of the western interior. And once again, with this boundary stalled over the Brooks Range, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and places like Ambler and Bettles are going to see a much better chance of collecting some heavier rainfall there as that wind is being pushed up the mountains and the moisture is literally being wrung out of the clouds. As that falls out over the same places, those numbers could be pretty impressive. In some cases, as we said, maybe as much as 1 to 2 inches or more for the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, and then also the north-facing slopes of the Alaska Range. To the west, we have low pressure just hovering out here across the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, pretty close to Nome. And with the boundaries in place here, the warm front across the mainland area and the cold front out across the Bering, the focus for that rainfall is pretty much going to stay in its place. I mean, we have another piece of this puzzle here across the Gulf. That's channeling warm and wet air into south central and Prince William Sound, so it is going to be a wetter period, especially like Thursday night into Friday. It looks pretty wet for south central. Out across the west, you get a hint of a ridge trying to build in right here. But we also have another wave of weather trying to build in across the western Bering. None of these storms are terribly strong or potent wind makers, but we are going to see winds come up as they pass through, so pay attention to that, especially if you're heading out on the boat. Talk about temperatures now. It's going to be a mild period across the interior with lows back in the mid to upper 50s, maybe even near 60 degrees. Remember, the moisture being added to the atmosphere will help keep temperatures up. Clouds will certainly do that as well. Upper 30s to low 40s across the north slope, so a mild night for you tomorrow morning. 53 around Nome, southwest, Bristol Bay looking to see lows near 50 degrees. Southeast, expect lows in the mid to upper 50s. Some places probably near 60, 51 in Kodiak. Talkeetna about 57 and Fairbanks closer to 60. High temperatures for your Wednesday afternoon will be warm from Fort Yukon all the way to North Way and Eagle. Lower 80s expected. The Middle Tanana Valley, low 70s. South central in the upper 60s to about 70 degrees. If you see sunshine in southeast, you'll probably jump right back into the 70s again. Coastal areas likely looking at 60s around Sitka, Gustavus, all the way down toward Ketchikan and Annette. A milder day for the Beaufort Seacoast, still holding on to 40s and 50s there. Kotzebue Sound temperatures looking mild, 50s and 60s for you. St. Paul 52 for your Wednesday, 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint about 59. A low down to 52 Thursday morning. You'll see temps in the 40s and 50s up the west coast. Looking at Point Hope, about 49 degrees, 35 around Barrow and Utqiagvik, 36 for Kaktoik, mid to upper 50s for Fort Yukon, going westward toward Tanana, Ambler, Bettles, upper 40s and lower 50s there. South Central should see overnight lows in the, let's say lower 50s there for you and mid 50s for southeast. Highs on Thursday start to cool off in the interior, 60s and 70s instead of 70s and 80s now. 30s and 40s up north, South Central, 50s and 60s southeast, cooler, 50s and 60s for you.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to your aviation weather now, we're going to start off with a large part of the interior under VFR conditions stretching through the middle and the upper Yukon Valley and into the Copper River Valley, but that's really about where it stops. When you look out to the west, the Bering Sea will start with IFR conditions. Same goes for most of the northern slope, a large part of the Gulf stretching into the outer coast of southeast with MVFR and through the inner channels, all the way up through the northern Gulf, Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet with IFR over the western Alaska range, and then we're back into IFR for a large part of the central and western Bering, as well as the Pribilof, St. Matthew, and the windward side of this case, Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula. As we get into the afternoon tomorrow, the morning sun will likely help to produce a better chance for widely scattered showers and thunderstorms across the northern interior and the eastern interior, south and west toward Galena. As you get out toward Bethel, the YK coastline, most of Bristol Bay, I'm not thinking there will be much of a risk for that. MVFR conditions should prevail with IFR across the Beaufort Seacoast, across most of the Bering Sea, the Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula's Pacific coast, and across the outer coast of southeast, with MVFR filling in a little bit more across the southern inside passage of southeast, but northern areas, including Juneau, Chilkoot, and White Pass, and many other locations there up toward Gustavus will probably sneak out with VFR conditions in the afternoon, and we'll see improvements along Cook Inlet down toward Kodiak and the northern end of the archipelago there. As we get into the afternoon Thursday, IFR will still be across the Beaufort Seacoast. You may see some improved visibility in ceilings around the Chukchi coast. IFR pushes inward a little bit toward Norton Sound. The YK coastline goes up the Kuskokwim Valley into the Alaska Range and north of Lake Iliamna. The southern end of Kodiak Island and out toward the Bering fills in once again. IFR conditions across the terrain for southeast and some parts across the outer coast, including Sitka, Yakutat into parts of Prince William Sound, the Chugach Range there. Some improvements by Thursday afternoon. Widespread MVFR, though, should be expected from southwest to southeast. Most of the bearings under IFR, and IFR continues across the Beaufort Seacoast with more widespread MVFR north of the Yukon Valley. But you'll notice that Fairbanks out toward Tanana and eastward, likely to Eagle and Northway, should remain under VFR flying conditions for most of your Thursday. Let's go back and take a look at your pass conditions for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. Looking for ceilings to come down a little bit as we get into the afternoon hours tomorrow. MVFR expected as the day goes on. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see IFR conditions to start the day, but marginal conditions should prevail by the afternoon. IFR also expected to start around Rainy Pass with some improvements noted there, and for Windy Pass by the afternoon. Isabel Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions throughout the day. Mentasta Pass, looking for VFR conditions throughout most of your day, watching for shower and thunderstorm activity, possibly around Tanita Pass as well. IFR there to start with some improvements during the afternoon. Portage Pass looks like an IFR start with some improvements as we go through the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass right now look pretty good. VFR conditions should prevail. Freezing levels indicate some lower levels here across the northern and central Bering Sea from St. Lawrence Island south of the Bering Strait to Nunivak Island and westward St. Matthew. But after that, we're still back in some summertime heat. Levels there anywhere from 10 to 14,000 feet. Slightly cooler weather across the north and eastern Gulf Coast, including most of southeast. Levels there maybe just below the 12,000 foot mark. And then 8 to 10,000 foot levels across the Beaufort Seacoast. Icing potential, we just don't see a whole lot. No significant icing below 10,000 feet, but if you are flying above that, we will have some patchy areas of light to isolated moderate across the west and northwestern parts of Alaska, but for most of general aviation concerns should not be significant. Across the Arctic coast, a northerly flow coming across will turn more westerly as we get toward the Beaufort Sea. Those levels there reaching 50 to 95 knots. A southwest westerly flow south of southeastern Alaska, coming in at 50 to 60 knots there into the west coast of the U.S. Our big player is low pressure around the Bering Sea and a strong and steady westerly flow that's working in over the Bering Sea and the North Pacific, coming in around 75 to 110 knots. This is keeping a lot of wet weather moving through the Bering Sea, and we'll keep the focus for active storm situations up across the north right now, with the coldest air also locked out of play. A ridge of high pressure is still in charge of the Gulf, but we're getting into a stronger westerly flow at the 9,000-foot level. Speeds inside the interior anywhere from 15 to 30 knots. An onshore flow that's light for southeast, and a westerly flow across the Bering will continue with southerlies across the west coast. Inside winds looking at 20 to 30 knots. Westerlies across the chain in the Bering Sea, 15 to 50 knots as you get south of the islands and right over them. A little bit of a ridge trying to hold on to the Gulf, but not terribly strong. 20 to 30 knots there at their strongest at this point. Turbulence issues will mainly be across the Aleutians below 4,000 feet, watching for considerable moderate as we go through your Wednesday. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the Day-Night Band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or a radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
That happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image.
Sure. Yep.
That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible.
Okay, right.
The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery.
Okay.
Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in.
Okay.
It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora.
Wow.
And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
But this looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights.
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. Sure, we can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about Dehne and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
On to your marine weather. Now we're going to start off with sea surface temperatures. This time of the year it's not uncommon to see really warm water across the eastern Gulf, and those levels are approaching 14 to 15 degrees C. In some cases in the inside passage up the Dixon entrance we're pushing 17 to 18 degrees C. So pretty warm stuff there. You also notice a blossom of heat across southwestern Alaska from the Kuskokwim Delta all the way up through Eetolen Strait and into Norton Sound and the upper end of Kotzebue Sound. Very warm water there, but there's still plenty of cold water to be had up across the Beaufort Sea, where levels are just above 5, maybe 6 degrees C, and we still have even colder water under some areas that are still looking at marginal ice. As we zoom into the North Slope and the Beaufort Sea coast, you can see there is still some higher concentration ice from Kaktovik all the way to just north of Prudhoe Bay, and then well north of Barrow, but a very large area of marginal ice. Is certainly closer to the coast there, and this of course is not a solid pack of ice anymore. Concentrations could be as low as 0% to as high as 80% there. This is not a measure of thickness either. You can check that anytime by heading to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice and get the forecast details as well. Let's take a look at the forecast in southeast. Winds are going to change around in the next couple of days. We're going to get a little bit more of a southerly flow coming up the inside passage tomorrow. Light winds and small seas. Winds come up inland canal. Southeasterlies 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And then winds coming down the outer coast from the north and west. As the ridge starts to move a little bit further to the east, you'll see changes like that. 20 to 25 knots with 8 to 9-foot seas in most areas. Winds become a little less as we get across Thursday. 10 to 15 knots onshore with 5 to 6-foot seas. And a southerly wind continues across the northern half of the inside waters, 15 to 25 knots, 3 to 5-foot seas. A little bit more of a westerly flow, though, in the Dixon entrance, 15 knots and 3-foot seas through the Clarence Strait. For Wednesday in south central, look for a light wind inside of Prince William Sound, south and westerlies across the northern Gulf, 15 to 20, 5 to 6-foot seas there, and a southerly up inlet flow from Homer all the way to Kenai and into Anchorage, about 15 to as strong as 25 knots with 7-foot seas, the highest between Kenai, Clam Gulch, all the way down toward Kachemak Bay. As we get into Thursday, winds will diminish a little bit. A south and easterly flow at times through Cook Inlet, 15 knots there and 3 to 4 foot seas, 10 to 15 knot winds across the northern Gulf, and inside of Prince William Sound, still holding on to 2 foot seas there for most of your Thursday. Southwesterly winds expected across Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, and the North Pacific. We're expecting 20 to about 25 in most areas, 5 to 6 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast and inside of Bristol Bay, 6 foot seas on either side of Kodiak Island, and once you get down toward Sand Point, as much as 7 foot seas there with that southerly flow. Thursday, you'll start to see the winds and seas pick up a little bit further west of Cold Bay and Falls Pass, a little bit closer to the Bristol Bay region and Kodiak Island. About 10 to 15 knot winds should do it, but a sign of that change north of Cold Bay. Look at those southwesterlies, 25 knots with 7 foot seas on Thursday, and a little bit more of a westerly flow south of Sand Point with 9 foot seas developing. For the chain, 20 to 30 knot winds should be expected as we go through Wednesday. Most of the smaller season winds will be across the central and east, with stronger winds and higher seas out across Kiska to Attu, 10 to 11 foot seas expected there, with southwesterlies strengthening. As we go into Thursday, you can see kind of that spreading eastward with time. From Kiska to Shemya, 30 to 35 knot winds, 12 to 15 foot seas there. On the other side of things, about 9 to 11 foot seas from Nikolsky to Unalaska, with 30 knot winds prevailing as we go through your Thursday. For the west coast, look for a south and westerly flow developing here. Higher seas still not too bad. Around St. Paul to St. George, 7 foot seas there. Smaller seas inside of Norton Sound, but everyone looking at about a 20 knot wind on Wednesday. For Thursday, the stronger winds will really stay to the south, but the higher seas start to bleed in a little bit as we get to St. Paul and St. George. 7 foot seas there. And notice we're holding onto a northerly flow now from St. Lawrence Island down toward Nunivak Island, about 15 knots with a 3 to 4 foot sea. Southerlies hold on inside of Norton Sound. That's all feeding into low pressure that's dragging in an easterly wind across the Beaufort Seacoast over the ice. Stronger winds for the Chukchi, 25 knots from the north and east with a 4 to 5 foot sea, up to 30 knots as we get into Thursday. Northeasterlies across the north slope for the most part, 15 to 20 knots, all feeding into low pressure in a front holding across the north slope. Recapping tonight's weather, weather is changing for southeast slowly but surely, and it looks like rain will be in your forecast as we get toward the end of the week. Quite a bit more rain heading in for west and southwestern Alaska, focusing on the Brooks Range and the Alaska Range, and parts of the interior will get wet as well. But it looks like some cases could see as much as a ½ inch to 2.5 inches as we get through the rest of the week there. So if you're going to be out on the rivers, make sure you're paying attention to the potential of them coming up even more than they are right now. Several waves of rain will be working into the west coast with a better chance of showers and storms across the northern interior and the east as we go through Wednesday, and wet for many more places on Thursday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.